out, and I've heard what you said, Yael. So at the end, if I can think of some chizuk, I will say something. But we are all our best mechazkim. And we also happen to belong to a people which actually has tremendous chosen. And we've been through a lot, thousands of years, and we are still here. Others are not. And we have, with divine help, as a people, survived unimaginable things. So that's something to reflect on. But I will say something more specific at the end. And I believe we are about to hit starting time. The starter's gun. Okay? So on that note, I want to repeat something I said. Okay, Jack, you're well? You have to unmute for me to hear you, or just wave. Jack, wave. He's up here. It is, I think, he's the reason why we are still studying Moreh Nevukhim. I wanted to ask after your welfare and health.
Thank you, Baruch Hashem. Baruch Hashem.
Good. Baruch Hashem is always a good answer. I trust that's Baruch Hashem. Okay. At the beginning of the course of Shiurim, I did say that we are reading a book written in the 12th century, completed in the year 1190. It's a long time ago. Sent to a disciple by Rambam, who was seeking a philosophically sophisticated Jewish theology and suitable for his time. Now, his time means Aristotle. Aristotle lived a long time ago. Aristotle said things that would be very palatable to a Greek city-state in the 5th century. This was a state where the meritocracy ruled. There were slaves. There were people who were graded, and women were not very highly thought of, Yael, as you know, okay? This was the case with Aristotle and Greek society as a whole. So we have to expect certain ways of thinking that we find objectionable, if not pretty horrible. So I think that last week we talked about the hierarchy of divine providence, and this is kind of bothersome. We are used to democracy, we're used to equality, and we want to feel that we are all equal before any higher authority. But we have to understand that Rambam is writing in Aristotelian terms to somebody who wants to know how he combined Judaism with Aristotle. By the way, the questioner is not necessarily asking for a theological explanation of why Jews are having a rough time. Now, I don't need to rehearse Rambam's personal history or the history of his student, Yehuda ibn Shimon, to whom these letters were sent. They had a very tough time. The Almohades came in, made their life miserable. Who knows what happened to them? Killings, conversions, forcible rapes, who knows what, okay? One lot after another. Rambam's family disappeared from view for 8 years. We don't know what happened. Now, they get to Fez. There's a bit of peace and quiet, but not much. Then they're almost drowned on the beaches of Acre. And then it's difficult to survive in the Holy Land. Eventually, they get to Egypt. David, Rambam's brother, is drowned at sea. He says he spent a year bedridden in a deep depression. But he wrote, he taught, he organized. He died when he was 70. And he was first-class physician. So what I'm saying is that don't expect the Rambam to speak to us directly in the way that we'd speak to somebody here this evening when the Jewish people are also having a very tough time. So having said that, I'm just going to repeat that there is a theme here that I hope you have absorbed, namely, Maimonides consistently in important theological issues takes Aristotle on board, that's his model, then he tweaks the Aristotelian project and he adds something that's particularly Jewish. So he saves prophecy from Aristotle by giving the divine intervention as to who's going to get prophecy and who's not. He saves the concept of the eternity of the universe. Again, Aristotle, but tweaking it. And the same thing with divine providence. God doesn't intervene, except when he does. But when he does, is a problem. Does he do it that he actually comes and says, okay, I'm going to give Chaim Yankel, who is a perfect Maimonidean personality, a special divine providence, and he'll be saved, or Chaim Mushka will be saved, and no one else? Or as both Samuel ibn Tibbon and his son Moses ibn Tibbon implied, what God does is he says, if you follow the plan that my humble servant Maimonides presents to you, you will be able to weather any difficulty and any harsh time, including one that threatens your life, because you have the intellectual and the spiritual resources to do so. Now, there was a little bit about Shoah, and that's, of course, a raw nerve, and I would never want to say there's an explanation. There are theological explanations. I'm not going to deal with them. We are a generation that is still feeling the Shoah, and it will never leave us. Perhaps our great-great-great-grandchildren will be ready for a theology of Shoah. But I'm going to say a little word or two about Viktor Frankl. Anybody heard of Viktor Frankl?
Yes.
Yael, do you want to tell us about Viktor Frankl? But you have to unmute.
He was a psychiatrist before the Second World War, and he survived Auschwitz, and he wrote several books about logopedy.
Great. I will say a little more, but
Logotherapy.
Logotherapy, certainly correct. He was a neuroscientist, actually, and there was a post-World War II school of psychotherapy called logotherapy. Now, he was a Viennese doctor who was deported to Theresienstadt in 1942. He spent the following 3 years in Auschwitz and Dachau, but he survived. And what he wrote is that in any situation, even a concentration camp, you can survive psychologically by focusing on the spiritual significance of life rather than what's happening to you physically. If you can find meaning in what you do, wherever you are, you have a chance of surviving as a human being, even though physically you may not. But whatever time you spend in that hell will be a time well spent. And I'm just going to cite you from page 86 of, I think, his main book, Man's Search for Meaning. He writes the following few lines. We who lived in concentration camps can remember the men who walked through the huts, giving comfort to others, giving away their last piece of bread. They may have been few in number, but they offer sufficient proof that everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of human freedom. To choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. And that may be a modern form of what Rambam is saying. As I said, that's the hidden meaning of what he was saying. Certainly felt to be the pshat in the Rambam by the Tibbonides, father and son, and it fits well with the Rambam's approach, which is the minimum of divine intervention, the maximum of human perfection, working on oneself, becoming a person who has all of these qualities and can choose freedom wherever they are, whatever situation we find ourselves in. And I think that Primo Levi, in his book about his experience, says something very, very similar. So we can then, according to Maimonides, understand that every situation we are in, however terrible it may appear, is an opportunity for us to develop this personality, what we're going to call shortly the Tzura, the Maimonidean form, this soul, which makes us human beings into a little lower than angels when we want to be. Of course, human beings can be as low as the beasts if they want to be. And that is the challenge of human freedom. There was also something else that came up, and one could say, look, for an Orthodox Jew who lives a halachic life, why shouldn't they get 100% protection and hashgacha from anything bad? From observant, abgehitten Jews have suffered badly. Why? Shouldn't just being a true halachic Jew give you immunity? The answer, according to Maimonides, is no. And I'm going to say something else here. Maimonides says, and this is very famous, and Jean is very conversant with the passage, there is a path to perfection. And Maimonides presents it very graphically in a chapter we haven't read, but you're invited to read the guide from beginning to end, if you can, okay? And you'll see a parable of the palace. King is inside the palace, and people are going around and around trying to get into the palace. And Maimonides very clearly says that some of these people are Talmidei Chachamim. They are excellent Talmudists. They are great halachists, but they cannot get into the inside section of the palace to see the king because they are not Maimonidean. They're not thinking. They are not philosophizing. They're not developing a relationship with God at a very high metaphysical level. It's not enough to be a shomer mitzvot, and we'll see that. Because whilst Maimonides was a great halachist, and he was, commentator on the Mishnah, halachist, he slips in his philosophy in a mild form. In Shmoneh Prakim, the commentary to Masechet Sanhedrin, he slips it in to his Hilchot Shuvah, slips it into Hilchot Deot, and at the end of his sections in the 14-book code, we get little sermons and little ideas here and there. All of this is a foretaste of the guide, but the guide takes us into amazing places, and that's what we are doing. So one has to bear that in mind too. Does the Rambam say that if you become a Maimonidean perfect person, you don't keep halakha? We'll talk about that when we do Tamei HaMitzvot, again from a philosophical point of view. Certainly not. And I'm going to give you my take on this, which may or may not be correct. But I think that he regards halakha as the boot camp. We train to be Maimonidean perfect people by beginning to live halakha. But it has to be the right halakha. Maimonides objects to all sorts of distortions of halakha. So he's got a philosophy of halakha within his philosophy of halakha. But if you get it right, you're on the path. But you have to go above and beyond. Do you still have to do halakha after you become perfect? Yes, you do. Because halakha is your fitness room. You've gained your fitness. You're now a champion triathlon runner. If you don't train every day, you'll lose it. Halakha is the way that we train to maintain, not only to get to the level, but we have to maintain. So I hope that that is an insight that may or may not be valuable in this context. So we'll talk about this more when we talk about Tamei HaMitzvot. And I think that's probably enough by way of introduction. But if anybody wants to say something or make a comment, or ask a question about last week's presentation and our discussion of Rambam on Hashgacha Pratit, I'm happy to take that now. Would anybody like to have the floor? If I don't hear a sound, I say shtika kahoda adami, the Talmudic aphorism that if you're quiet, you agree with me. So we can start to talk about what we are going to talk about as a prelude to the problem of the existence of evil. Why is there evil in the world? Why does God tolerate evil? Now, I said we're going to have a prelude to that. We're not going to go into it straight away. We will start this evening if we get there, but I am going to make a prelude to that. And that is, I want to emphasize Maimonides' distinction, following Aristotle, between matter and form. What is matter? Chomer. What is form? Tzura. Well, chomer, let's take the example of a chair, which is a good Aristotelian example. Chair. What is a chair? Well, a chair is composed of two parts. Number one, it could be made of any material: plastic, wood, metal, steel. It could have armrests. It could have a backrest. It could be high. It could be short. Could be wide. Could be thin. This is the matter, the chomer of a chair. But there's also the tzura, the form. By this, Rambam means following Aristotle perfectly, and possibly Plato, but I'm not going to go into the connection between Plato's ideals and Aristotle's matter and form. There's something called chairness. How do you recognize a chair? It could be made of wood, plastic, it could have side arms, it could not. But we all still say, chair. There's something about the chair that associates with the idea of chair in the grammar in our brains. Okay, we know this is a chair. And then we'll also see something which may look like a chair, but we'll say, no, this is not a chair. There is something called chairness. Okay, this is the form. So thinking about that, if we look at human beings, there's matter and there's form. Matter is blood, sinews, muscle, everything we have that makes us into the people we are: height and size, smallness, largeness, etc. The form, what makes us human, we say, this is a human being. Now that form is generally something connected, according to Rambam following Aristotle, with something intellectual, something belonging to a non-animal aspect. Okay, that's the human form. We are not animals. We're not solely focused on eating and sex. Those are the two things that drive the animal world. There may be small exceptions here and there, but we don't have to make a large meal of those exceptions. Nothing in the animal world gets close to the achievements in any sphere, intellectual, moral, artistic, of human beings. So this is the matter and the form. And it's on this basis that we're going to have a look at what Rambam is saying in Book 3, Chapter 8. And there'll be some interesting stuff on the way about the Hebrew language, Lashon HaKodesh, but it also lets you into Maimonides' thinking about the balance between the physical side, or the corporeal side, or I even say the carnal side of human beings, and their spiritual soulful sides. Aristotle is very insistent, unlike Plato, that the matter and the form in this world, in the sublunar world, exist together. They are never separate. So human beings, for better or for worse, have to deal with their physical side. Your corporal, you have to eat, have to drink, you're driven to have sex, and all sorts of other things. He also includes bad vibes like anger, hatred, jealousy, okay? So all of these things are the chomer. The Yetzer controls them. So let's read a little Maimonides. I'm going to share screen. Yael?
I hear you.
You have to help me share the screen. I'm not a host.
Just a second.
Can you enable share screen, please?
Right, I will do. Yep, done.
Right, thank you. Well done. Okay. הנה כבר התבאר שכל השחתה והפסד או חיסרון הוא מפני החומר. Every bad thing that happens to us is because of our material chomer side. And can we have people muted, please? Yael, can you mute people? I don't think I'm a host. Thank you. Say somebody is particularly ugly, or they're badly formed, and and people are no longer able to coordinate, they can't move smoothly, they're not doing well. These bad things could happen to you from the beginning, or they could occur later on in life. This is part of our matter, which is always susceptible to corruption or to lack of proper function. As material creatures, our bodies break down. They're not all absolutely perfect forever and ever. Lo achar tsurato. This is not the form. The form we have is always with us. And death and illness are a result of chomer. And all the bad things we do, that's the chomer, not the tzura. השגת האדם את בוראו וצירו כל מושכל והנהיגו תאוותיו וכעסו והסתכלו במה שצריך לבחר בו ובמה שצריך לחקרו, and everything that a person does by becoming a more understanding person, a more intelligent and moral person, and controlling lusts and desires and anger, all this is the tzura. But eating and drinking, mishgal is a particularly harsh term, but actually Rambam says it's not. Mishgal is also having sex. V'rov tavotav bahem v'chen ka'aso, and there are many lusts associated with the sexual drive, and so it's anger, v'chol midara'ah, and every evil trait, hakol nimshach achar hachomer shelo. V'chasher hitpa'er she'inyan ken. Now, line 11. Now, Maimonides swaps Aristotle for God. God, I told you, I don't think Aristotle is a believer in God, but Maimonides certainly is. So he says, God decided that we human beings have to be a combination of matter and form. I guess so that we can have free will. Okay, we'll take that as a given for the time being. Otherwise, the world would be a different world to the world we know. Okay, they always come together, tzura and the chomer. התחייב הקשר הזה, צורה האנושית הנכבדת מאוד אשר ביארנו, שצלם אלוהים ודמותו, וזה החומר האופרי חשוך המביא אותו לכל כישרון וסד נתן לה, רצוני לומר צורה אנושית, יכולת על החומר. Therefore, God had to give us the ability to control our chomer. וממשלה ואדנות ושלטון, and rulership and overlordship and dominion ad shetachrichehu, so that we can suppress the chomer in its most extreme form. V'timna tavotav v'tishivem al ma she'efshar min hayoshev hashivui, and to bring our carnal side under control and make it reasonable. Umida nechlaku madrigot benem umizene. Now, and people differ. There are some people, I'm just going to move on here in English, who are very good. They always choose to control their worst sides, and they're always being holy and moral and spiritual, wonderful people. We'd all like to have them very close to us. Okay? But there are other people, okay, who are not so, okay? And they are people, okay, who, okay, and here Aristotle also talks about kush hamishush. Rambam has something with this. I guess I should say this before I move on to the other people. He says that the very good people, the Maimonidean perfect people, they control their physical, their carnal side very well. And in particular, they don't much like tactile stuff. Touching, you know what that is all about, okay? Don't do any of that. And then if you look at line 20, Chush hamishush, the tactile sensation, asher hu cherpa aleinu, kamo shezachar Aristotle. That tactile stuff is not good. Once you start, you never know where you end. Asher bavorov nitavela machal u'mishter u'mishgal, goes on about the sex again. Ki tzarich lemaskil lema'et mehem ma she'efshar u'lehisatem bahem u'tzta'er basoto otam v'shlo yidaber bahem v'lo yarkiv bahem. Don't talk about it. Don't spend your time. And don't make poems and songs about sex. Or groups that go in for this. As quickly as possible. Quickly get away from the carnal, get into the intellectual and into the spiritual. אשר החזק והנכבד שבהם השגת אלוהים והמלאכים ושאר פעולותיו כפי היכולת, become major theologians. ואלה אנשים הם עם האלוה תמיד, and these are the people about whom it says in Tehillim, אלוהים אתם ובני עליון כולכם. You are like God. Elohim could also be the judge, okay? And you are superior people. זהו המבוקש מן האדם רצון. Omnam, now line 26, Ha'acherim, the others, Hanivdalim me ha'eloha, are separate from God. Vehem, beginning of line 27, Hamon haschalim. Rambam uses the term schalim often. Sachal is, I'll say an ignoramus for the time being. I could use stronger terms. Ignoramus, okay? Somebody who's not driven to learn, not driven to improve, mentally, intellectually, they are happy remaining at the level of an animal with a big tactile drive in their life. הם בהפך זה, ביטלו כל מחשבה והסתכלות במושכל וישימו תכליתם החוש ההוא אשר היא חפתנו הגדולה. For us, it's shameful what they do. Getting drunk, having sex, going to rave, I don't know. Whatever it is, this is what Rambam doesn't like. רצוני לומר חוש המישוש ולא יחשבו ולא יתבוננו רק במאכל ובמשקל ולא בדל, כמו שנאמר ברשעים היותם שיתופים במאכל ובמשתה ובמשקל. That combination of food, drink, and sex is repeated time and time again in this chapter. וגם אלה, but Rambam has psukim from Yeshayahu, גם אלה ביין שגו ושכר טעו וגומר. They went astray after wine and strong drink. ואמר, their eating is disgusting. Their tables are full of filth and vomit. It's a pasuk from Yeshayahu where we actually talk about the fact that that adulterous women, okay, they now rule over the people of Israel. Not our wonderful women, but these adulterous, tactile women who are only out to trap men and to create a society of promiscuous people, victims of concupiscence. Now he goes on a little sexist about the fact that the women should not be ruling in their feminine way. And he talks about the fact that we should be extremely careful before we get involved with anything like this. Now, he does go on to say, line 35, some people are lucky in Maimonidean terms because they don't have, I guess, much of a sex drive, okay? They're undersexed and they don't have a great appetite and they're not drawn to drink or strong drink. They are lucky. Maimonides says these people have a really good head start, okay? If you have a good chomer, and you are by nature an ascetic, well then, thank your lucky stars, says Maimonides, because you're on the right track.
Too suspicious.
Okay? Debbie is saying it's too
He would
suspicious.
never know. It's
I
too
don't know what
super-
she
No, no,
means.
He would never say thank you, lucky stars. It's too superstitious.
You mean superstitious? Or,
Superstitious, yeah.
Debbie says I mustn't say thank you, lucky stars when it comes to the Rambam because it's too superstitious. I shouldn't mention luck and I shouldn't mention stars. I apologize. I will try not to say anything like that again. Okay? The imu bilti neot einon nimna min hamitlamed lichvosh oto. But say you have a bad nature. Say you start out, you are highly sexed. You really love food and you really enjoy drinking lots. Then you have a challenge. But Rambam says, don't give up, okay? Because you can learn how to control yourself. Why did Shlomo write a book of Mishlei? And how much of Mishlei, if you remember, is about not getting involved with drinking, not overeating, not too many women for men. I guess not too many men for women if he was more egalitarian. Mitzvat HaTorah and mitzvot v'azarotea omlam hem nichbosh tavat hachomer kulam. They all come to help you overcome your carnal side. וצריך למי שיבחר להיות אדם באמת לא בהמה. If you want to be a human being, and of course in Aristotelian terms this is the best human being, not any old human being, ולא בהמה, and not anything that falls short of this, but Toar Adam, a behema, looking like a person but not being one. ותמונתו שישים כל השתדלותו לחסר כל צורכי החומר ממאכל ומשתה ומשקל וכעס. It's interesting that he twice attaches anger to eating, drinking, and sex, okay? He thinks that lack of control, anger, is for the Rambam. He says this in several places in his Moreh and his Mishneh Torah. When you lose control of yourself, and that's anger, you are in fact losing your soul. Anger is the worst possible character fault, okay? Because you've lost control. And losing control according to the... Now, Rambam also says, for example, that there are cases where you have to display anger. You have to. This is righteous indignation. But it should never be anger as loss of control. And he says so. It is anger that you adopt as a emotion that you want to show to others to make them aware of what you are going to do, but never be taken over by anger. It's interesting that Shakespeare says something similar in his play, Henry V. When Henry V asked the English soldiers to become angry, okay? What does he say? Once more unto the breach, dear friends, or let us block up the walls with our English dead. Nothing so becomes, in peacetime, nothing so becomes a man as modest stillness and humility. But when the blast of war blows in our ears, then stiffen the sinews, summon up the blood, disguise fair nature with hard-favored rage. You disguise your fair nature with anger, but it's under control. If you lose control, Maimonides says, you've allowed the chomer to overcome the tzura, and then you're in a bad place. It's important, I think, to recognize that use of kas at the end of the list. L'chol shar hamidot hanimshachot achar hatava v'hakas, and all of those other faults that follow after lust and anger, v'yevosh mehem, you should be ashamed of them, v'yasim lahem migdarot b'nafsho, and place blockages on them in your soul. Do not let them burst out and overcome you. Omnam, of course you have to eat and drink, and you also have to have a sex drive, and it's important to reproduce, okay? Nevertheless, that should be a minimum. 42. The Gemara in Psachim discusses the fact that shouldn't eat from a sudah that's not a sudat mitzvah. Something should make your sudah. So sudot Shabbat, sudot Chag, sudot for life cycle events, sudot Hodaya. But every sudah you eat should not only be for the sake of eating, it should be to celebrate some kind of higher value. Now, Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair in Chulin is famous for saying, I never eat with anyone ever, okay? Because the temptation is when you sit down to a meal, maybe ostensibly a Sudat Mitzvah, but you'll soon be sidetracked and you'll do all sorts of things. And the Gemara is very interesting because there's a Gemara in Chulin, Zayin Bet, that describes Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, invites Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair to have a meal with him, knowing that Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair doesn't usually accept invitations because he doesn't want to be drawn into anything that's less than a purely spiritual, intellectual, ideological, ethical meal. So he just has himself because nobody else is going to want to eat and drink at that standard. But to Rabbi Hanasi, he can't say no. So he says, okay, I'll come. When he comes, he sees in Rabbi Hanasi's stable white mules. Now, white mules are famous for being very violent. Yes, they are. Don't ask me why, but they are. In the Gemara, they're very violent and dangerous. So Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair stops and says, sorry, I can't eat with you. You've got dangerous animals in your home. So Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi says, oh, well, don't worry. I will sell them. Pinchas ben Yair says, if you sell them, you're simply passing the danger to someone else. It says, why should somebody else have these dangerous animals? So he says, you know what? I will let them roam free. No, you can't let them roam free. They're dangerous animals. They might hurt people. Okay, I'll cut off their hooves so they can't kick. Sar balei chayim. You can't cut off their hooves. I'll kill them. No, bal tashchit. Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair then leaves, and the Gemara says, because Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair never ate with anyone, but he was caught by the embarrassment of refusing Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, God arranged it, as it were, that the first thing he would see would be the white mules, and he would be able to get out of actually sitting down to a meal that didn't come up to his very high Maimonidean standard. Was Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair thinking along Maimonidean lines? Was he saying, as an elite member of a perfect squad, I cannot allow the Chomer perhaps to overcome the Yetzer ever? I'm not sure. I leave that to you. Most of the Rishonim say that this Gemara says that Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair didn't want to take anything from anybody because that makes you indebted, and then you will have to forgive them all any bad things that they might do. And we know once you become friends and you meet over eating or drinking, there's a bond, and that bond has all sorts of claims on the way you will relate to the people you eat or drink with. But whatever the case may be, it's an interesting and typical Maimonidean move, and I leave that to you, of course, for different ways of doing it. Now, he goes on about wine. I mean, alcoholism is a major problem. We know that. Orthodox Jews are not immune at all to this problem. And clearly, you have to stay away and have a small amount. Have it at Kiddush. You have it when you're celebrating. Have it at a Kosher Bracha. That's great, okay? But not outside of that. And then he goes on to say, and I also dislike people getting together and thinking and talking about wine or sex or food. So this is a very important thing. He begins on line 5 by saying, Kvar yadata omram, Chazal say in Masechet Yoma, Hirhurei Aveira kashin me Aveira. And this, of course, is grist for the Maimonidean mill. Thinking about a sin or excess, carnality, corporeality, which leads you to sin, is worse than the actual sin itself. Because as human beings, says Rambam, we need to use our thoughts to control our desires. And when we start thinking about embracing our desires, that is the worst possible thing a human being, in Maimonidean terms, can do. And here I just have to say, I mean, just drawing this example from my sleeve, was unfortunately a rabbi in Washington, D.C., who placed a camera in his mikveh, in his shul, and he would spy on female converts. He would send a woman who was converting to Judaism to rehearse the tefillah, because as you know, in an Orthodox tefillah for Giur, the woman has to be in the mikveh. The dayanim come in, they have to see her going under, coming up, and they will often ask questions. And as when she comes out of the tefillah after the dayanim have left, then she'll be Jewish. How do you solve the problem of a woman naked in a mikveh with male dayanim in the same room? Two ways of doing it. Either she wears a gown that's very loose fitting, that you can't see her body, but the water reaches, or you place ping pong balls, colored ping pong balls that float on the surface of the mikveh. So all you see when you come in is the head. This gives a new significance to the term talking head. So the dayanim talk to the head. They see the head disappear. The mikveh is covered with ping pong balls. Then the head comes up. This is a kosher tefillah. It's a bit harrowing, I think. You know, you're in the mikveh, the dayanim are there, and they'll ask you, what would you do if you discovered a piece of bread underneath your sofa during Chol HaMoed Pesach? I mean, it's a lot to ask. I've seen this, but I mean, anyhow, whatever it is, this rabbi, Orthodox rabbi, had a camera, and he'd send the women in to rehearse the tefillah, and he would spy on them. Sentenced to 7 years in jail, okay? But this is, according to Rambam, the worst thing you can do. You use your God-given intellect to perpetrate your bestial and behemah type drives, okay? So this is what he says here. And he says that's why we have to stay a long way away from even talking about those things that represent our corporeal, carnal sides of life. He cites a Gemara, line 10, Gemara in Ketubot and in Shabbat, we all know this Gemara. Whoever talks about sex at a chatunah, and he says, I know why the color's under the chuppah and the khatam, because they want to get into bed after the wedding is over. However many zchuyot or merits that person has, person who's saying this, however great they may be in Torah or Tzidkut, nothing counts, they're going straight to hell. Nivul peh. Now the Rambam goes on to say, the zegam muchuyav, and in terms of his philosophy, this is absolutely required, necessary. The most human, the tzura of humanity's speech, communication. And if you prostitute your communication, then you've prostituted the best side of yourself. V'tova gemala ha'elo al adam navdilo ba mishar balei chayim. We have communication in a way that no other creature has. Level of sophistication. Therefore, God says to Moshe, "Mi sampeh la'adam." V'amar hanavi Hashem Elohim natan li lashon limudim. God gave me a language. I can learn. I can study. I can improve. The sky is the limit. ולא ראוי שנשתמש בטובה ההיא שנתן לנו לשלמות ללמוד וללמד לגדול שבחסרונות ובחרפה. Those shameful bestial acts that we have to keep to a minimum, certainly not to discuss them openly. ואתם תהיו לי ממלכת כהנים וגוי קדוש. וכל מי שישתמש במחשבתו בדיבורו בדבר מענייני החוש ההוא, אשר הוא חרפה לנו, etc. או יאמרו בו שירים. Look at line 17. All make poems. Now, I don't know whether you've read the collections of the Muslim Arab poets of Spain, okay? They're about which topics, Jean? What do they write about?
Love.
You have to unmute. Yeah. What do they write about?
And all connect in wine.
And
Women.
young men, young women, that too. And which Jewish poet does the Rambam dislike? And he's getting at him here as well.
Maybe Yehuda Levi.
Yehuda Levi.
Absolument. Exactly. Okay. Exactly. Yehuda Levi, who is criticized before. Okay. When it comes to Nevuah, prophecy. Okay. כבר לקח הטובה שגמלו אלוה אותה והשתמש בה ונעזר בה במרי הגומל לא טוב ועובר על מצוותיו יהיה כמו שנאמר בהם וכסף הרביתי לה וזהב עשו לבעל. I've given you people silver and you've used it and you've prostituted it by using it to worship idols. It's from Moshe, different context, but Rambam uses it. Now he says, I have a... Yes, John.
I am surprised. He bombards us with so many psukim. He could have begin with the Gemara. I don't remember exactly, but it's something like Adam Nidon, V'kiso, Koso, V'kaaso. It would be better to speak about the Gemara than Aristotle to explain how bad is Kaas.
But perhaps Yehuda bin Shimon would not be impressed by the Mamar Chazal as he would by Aristotle. But you are right. Let's see if we can send an email to Rambam and suggest that he adds this. But I think he wants something sharper. En Adam Nidon Ela Bekiso. Okay, it's nice, but it's kind of a little softer. Okay, he wants to say you're a bunch of sinners, terrible sinners. You've prostituted. Hosea is exactly on prostitution. The married woman who goes off, Hosea is told to take a prostitute as a wife. All right. Now that, of course, Rambam says is chalom nuvui. Never do it in practice. But anyhow, now he says something to say about Lashon HaKodesh. Why is Hebrew called Lashon HaKodesh, the holy language? Now, Rambam, and I'm going to go through this, as I said, I'll translate this. He says it's because Hebrew has no word for the sexual act. No word for the sexual act as other languages do. He says, Mishgal, he says, I'm going to start with the end. Line 30. Would you like to read? No? Va'al yit'acha, and do not make a mistake by citing Yishgal. Okay, Rambam anticipated you, Deb. Okay. Shetachsheveu shem lipula. That's not a word for the sex act. Einoken. Ki shagal. Hashem hanara muchenet lemishgal bilvad. A Muslim thing. This is, I don't know, it's a Muslim equivalent of a Japanese gisha, the Havdil Elef Havdalot. But this is a woman who's there for sex. Nitzvah, and he's got a pasuk. Nitzvah shegeli mincha. And the woman who is there to satisfy your sexual needs is at your right hand. Va'amru yishgalena lefi haktiv. And it says in the Torah, yishgalena. Now we want to be finer, and we want to say yishkavena, which of course just means to lie. But shegel is not the act; it's the woman who is there, okay, to provide a channel for the man's sex drive. Inyano yikachena lenara lezeh ha'inyan, to take the young woman for this purpose, but not the actual act. Now, all I wanted to do here was to tell you about how you have to be, you suppress your chomer to be a good person. That's the starting point. But this is a little extra, okay? Now, he actually goes into quite a bit of detail here to say that nothing in Hebrew ever tells you about the sex act. Doesn't tell you about the male organ. There's no word for it. And there's no word for the female organ as such, okay? Not in Hebrew. And we use metaphors. Yishkav, yiv'ol, yikach, yigale erva, reveal the nakedness. There's nowhere. And he says this is why Hebrew is a Lashon HaKodesh, which is very Aristotelian, would make Yehuda ibn Shimon very happy. But Ramban disagrees, of course, Nachmanides. And he says, now he's talking about Shekel HaKodesh. Why is the Shekel in the book of Shemot that the Israelites gave to the temple called a holy shekel? Okay, I'm not going to go into whether some people worship money. For them, it's very holy indeed, but not the holy shekel. But why is it called shekel HaKodesh in the Torah? Shehu mipnei shedivrei haTorah v'nuvot v'chol divrei kedusha kulam b'lashon hahu ne'emru. Anything that has a mitzvah aspect is called Kodesh. And also he says, Halashon shakadosh baruch hu yitale shmo medaber bo. What language does God speak? Not English, not Arabic, not Ladino, not even Yiddish. Was redt Gott? Hebräisch. I'm afraid you'll have to accept that, says Ramban. And how does he speak to his prophets and to the children of Israel? Anochi v'lo yelecha, u'shar dibrot haTorah v'nuvuah. Uvo nikra bishmotav hakadoshim el, and the words for God are all in Hebrew, Elohim Tzvaot Shaddai v'Yud-Hei, Hashem HaGadol HaMiuchad, and the one we don't say, Ubo bara olamo, and God used it to create as well. Sefer Yitzirah, Kabbalah, the letters of the Hebrew alphabet are in fact the true DNA of the universe. V'kara shemot shamayim v'aretz v'chol asher bam. Umalachav, and all the angels, Michael, Gabriel, shemot lakadoshim, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Okay. V'arav amar b'Moreh Nevukhim. Now he cites his favorite target. Nachmanides is going to haul Maimonides over the coals, or so he thinks. There's no word for the male organ or the female organ, and not to the sperm, called Shichvat Zera, not to, then he says, even the bodily fluids and the solids that we expel are always referred to in a metaphorical way. Shegel, we got all of that. But what does Ramban say, line 43? No, you don't need all of this. The language is holy. It's a holy language. And the reason the Rambam mentioned al dati eidenu emet is not true. The fact that we bother to change Ishgalena to Ishgavena when we lane it, I think it means that Ishgalena is, even though I have no way of proving it. Rambam has a pasuk. Shagal, Shegel is the girl. But no, Ramban doesn't, he would like that to be the term for sex. Okay. This is a particularly distasteful passage. Rav Sheka, remember, comes to Jerusalem, Chizkiyahu, and he says all sorts of crude things. And so there's a crude word mentioned in the Bible related to Chara, okay, Chorehem. Kihu Shem Mugune. Now Ramban says that if Maimonides is right, then we should call the Hebrew language the clean language, Lashon Nikiya. And all over Shas, we have a statement that the Chachamim like to speak Lashon Nikiya. We'll be reading Noach, okay? Noach, in Noach we'll read Habehema she'einena tohora. Why don't we say Behema Tameya? Rashi says, because we want to use fine language and not even use the word Tameya. Okay. Do you think that Ramban how do you think Rambam, Maimonides, would answer Nachmanides? What's the first thing he would say? Nachmanides, you're wrong. Absolutely wrong. First thing, for what we know about, going back to the beginning of our Shiurim, about the word, about use of words. I'll make this sharper. What language does God speak in according to Maimonides? No language. Lushan HaKodesh. Does God speak? Does he have a tongue? Does he have lips? Does he articulate words? Is he a human being? Of course not. Maimonides would say that all communication is above the physical. God doesn't need a language. Okay? God doesn't need a language. Chas v'chalila, you should think he needs a language. Do you think God can't communicate to people who only speak Chinese? God communicates in a way that is understandable to those who have a form of communication with him, which was why Bnei Israel, they heard a call, a voice, that was probably in Hebrew, okay? But it wasn't God. That was the call that Moshe Yedaber, V'Elohim Yanenu V'Kol. It was the call that came into at the very low level. God's true voice. Secondly, I'm going to say something else that the Meshech Chochmah actually says. Maimonides would say, I don't like the idea of making Hebrew into a holy language. I don't like the idea of making anything human into holy. Holiness doesn't reside in a language, in a book, in a place, in a temple, anywhere, except when human beings are on the same wavelength as God. So I don't want you to give holiness. There was a time when you can be holy in Yiddish, in English, in Arabic, in Chinese, in any language you want. The important thing is the holiness and not the vehicle. Nachmanides is missing the message, is confusing the medium with the message. The message transcends all language. So if I was Maimonides, I would have answered Nachmanides, who lived a generation later, along these two lines. Take it or leave it. Now, I want to set the scene for our discussion of evil. And you know what? We might leave the extract from Yud Bet until next week when we do this. But I'm going to use the last 5 minutes to give you a little preview here, okay? The great problem of evil. Why is there evil in the world? So Maimonides would say the following, and we're going to read this, but as I said, I will give you a preview, okay? Maimonides says the following, okay? First of all, the problem of evil is always the problem of three irreconcilable propositions. We cannot reconcile them. Proposition 1, God is all-powerful, can do anything. 2, God is all-knowing, he knows everything. And 3, God is good. Okay? We don't want to say that God is not all-powerful. We don't want to say that he's not omniscient, all-knowing, and we don't want to say that God is bad. So why is there evil in the world? So Rambam begins, and we won't spend too much time on this, by dismissing 2 possible explanations. One is that suffering and evil is a punishment for sin. We must have sinned. That's why bad things have happened to us. And you can say that, and many Jewish thinkers have. Of course, when it comes to the Jewish thinkers saying, I sinned and therefore I suffered, that's not what everybody wants to do. And we have one great Jewish thinker in the Bible who refused absolutely to accept the fact that he had sinned and that's why he was suffering. And which biblical figure am I referring to? Eov, of course. Job. He says, no, you can, and his friends came and said exactly that. You know what? You must have done a terrible sin. That's why you suffered. No, Rambam says, absolutely untrue. And the book of Job is the answer because God rejects that message and all the explanations of Job's friends. He says, no, not true. Secondly, there is a view, very popular amongst Jewish thinkers, you suffer in this world because you're going to receive great reward in the next world. Rambam rejects that. He says, no, not true. Makes no sense at all. Because then there should be a different world. So when he dismisses these 2, he now comes to suffering. Why is there suffering and evil in the world? Number 1, we cause our own suffering. Okay, 1, most people in the world cannot control their chomer, and therefore, when they have an opportunity to indulge it, they do so. We ourselves indulge ourselves. Say we have a terrible liver disease, maybe because we drunk too much wine. Say we are short of breath, maybe we smoke too much, okay? Rambam, who is a doctor, believed that disease is caused by a lack of balance from one's early youth, okay? So we are evil to ourselves, and then we are evil to each other because people hate, kill, go to war. And all these things bring about physical and mental suffering. The universe is also composed of material. So whilst, for example, mountains are meant to behave well most of the time, and they do, sometimes a volcano erupts. This is because the world is composed of Chomer as well as Tzura. Chomer and Tzura live together, and they do not always reach a perfect harmony. And when things come out of harmony, when there's a tsunami or a volcano or a flood or a forest fire, this is a Chomer and a Tzura not actually working together. Well, as I said, talk about this and read how Rambam presents it. So the first reason he gives for suffering is really to do with ourselves and nature. Ourselves because we harm ourselves. And there are many evil people, okay, who want to kill and murder and destroy. And there is also nature that is composed of Chomer and Tzura, and they do not always work together well. But Rambam says, in terms of nature, natural evils are few and far between. They don't happen too often. Most people are born okay. Most mountains do not erupt. And most times there are no terrible and dreadful tsunamis. Number two, Rambam has a philosophical idea about evil being a privation. In other words, it's a lack. It's not actually that God does evil. What God does is he allows evil to take place because of the way in which the world works, because of Chomer and Tzura. But you can't say because he has created a potential for evil, he's created evil, because he says evil is the absence of good. Evil is, there's no such thing as evil itself. It's not an essence. Evil is only a privation, an absence of good. That, to my mind, is probably one of the weakest arguments in the Moreh Nevukhim. And we'll talk about that because it may be the deprivation of good, but people can suffer really horribly and badly. And number three, he says something very interesting. He criticizes Razes, the famous Muslim polymath and doctor, okay? He says people think that the world is there for them. He's talking really about natural evils here. He says the world is for them, but the world is not for them. If you think that because something bad has happened to you, there's evil in the world, that's not the right way of thinking. World is mostly good. Natural evil is fairly rare. And you have to think about that and focus on the entire world and not on yourself. But we'll read all of this in detail next time. So I'm going to stop the screen share. I think I can stop share. Okay. And we're back to, we have a couple of minutes if anybody is interested. And then Yael asked me for Divrei Chizuk. So, we'll see. But anybody want to make a comment? Remember, we're not going to be doing Evil Jean until next week, okay? La prochaine semaine. Pas aujourd'hui. Okay.
Is Rambam not aware of maintenant le mot m'échappe. Chez l'Ahava, comment on dit? Shiurim chez l'Ahava. Once, and secondly, there is a principle in the Gemara, Kol haolam nivra bishvili. Kol adam tzarich lechol rega lachshov haolam nivra bishvili.
What does that mean? Haolam nivra bishvili. That means that if you don't treat the world properly, then your existence is useless. The Rambam can turn everything around. He has no problem. But you have to look back and say, why would Chazal say Haolam nivra bishvili? Responsibility and obligation, not reward, and not to make you feel proud that the whole world is created for me. No, this is not an individualistic, this is not Ayn Rand, okay? This is, you have a responsibility. Rambam can turn everything around. What was I heard Sipurim Shel Ahava. Is that what you said in the first part of your comment?
Isurim.
Yesurim shel
Ah,
Ahava,
Yisurin shel Ahava.
Tov Scharan.
We talked about that last week. He said Chachamim added a concept of Yisurin shel Ahava. Those Chachamim who believe that Yisurin are a good and helpful thing. That's a separate question to the question of evil. Yisurin shel Ahava, by their definition, are good. It's Ahava. So it can't be evil. You cannot say that. Cannot be evil. Okay. So are there any more questions or comments? Jack?
One comment. Isn't it said that evil was created or exists so that man should have a free choice? Otherwise, he would not have a free choice.
Correct. I said that a little earlier today. That's the Chomer and the Tzura. We have to strive for a balance. But evil is more than that, because Chomer and Tzura, in terms of human beings, are things that you should be able to control. But there are evils in the world, children who are born without a sense of sight, who are born physically defective, that don't seem to have anything to do with this free will. I didn't freely will that a child of my friend should be born terribly disabled, okay? I didn't, as an act of free will, desire that there should be a tsunami or an earthquake, and I didn't desire there should be a terrible war that killed millions of people, okay? So free will and hashgacha are two different things. But wait for evil next week, okay? That's when we're actually going to address it more deeply. So,
Okay, I have one quick question, and that is, maybe it's more of an observation. You very, very nicely laid out the Rambam's life and all the
who
difficulties
is
he went.
speaking?
Oh, it's Harvey. It's Harvey in Canada.
Harvey, you're still in Canada.
Unfortunately, yes.
Okay. Yes.
So you laid out his life, and a very brief narrative, and he had very difficult things. His brother died, and whatever. Did the Rambam ever actually comment on how he saw his life in terms of his own philosophy, or he doesn't go there?
Absolutely not. Would be a very un-Aristotelian thing to do. It's totally impersonal. He would never mention himself. But I'm going to say something here. Rambam, in his life, wrote two famous letters. All his letters are worthwhile studying. Famous letters directed to Jewish communities. One letter was to a community where a rabbi had come along and said to this community, anybody who pretended to convert to Islam to save their lives is a terrible sinner and can never return to the fold. And Rambam wrote Ma'amar Kiddush Hashem, in which you feel that he is expressing a very human emotion here. And he says to this community, disregard that rabbi completely. He is totally off the wall when it comes to what Jewish rabbis should say, because we should have sympathy. And he goes to great lengths to explain why Kiddush Hashem is, if you like, an option. You can do it. It'll be a great thing if you give up your life for the sake of your faith. But unless you are required to commit 3 sins, and by the way, saying you're a Muslim is not one of these three sins, because it's not idolatry. Islam is not an idolatrous form of worship. Rambam says if you didn't kill, commit a sexual crime, or worship an idol, then you can pretend to be a Muslim to save your life. Why did he do so? Because he empathized. This community, maybe in theoretical terms, everybody should be prepared to give up their lives for anything at all about preserving their Judaism, but it doesn't really work like that. So I wouldn't say that the Rambam was devoid of human sympathy, no matter what impression you might get from his putting down of our physical side. He also wrote a second letter to Teiman, to Yemen. Geret Teiman where somebody had come along and said he was the Messiah and they should all rise up and leave what they were doing, accompany him on some magic carpet to Jerusalem. And he said, you've got to stay calm. These things do not happen in this way. Don't believe these people. They are false prophets. And if you do the sort of thing that the prophet is asking you to do, you will only bring tragedy upon yourself. So he was connected with what was happening. He would, just to take halachic out of my sleeve, the community, he was sensitive to what goes on in the life of the Jews. For example, Rambam in Egypt abolished Chazarat HaShatz. I don't any repetition of the Amida. Why? Because people what do people do during the repetition of the Amida? By and large, do they take it seriously? Well, perhaps some do, but many people don't. That's when you relax. The Chazan is going off and doing his thing. So he was sensitive to the reputation of the Jewish synagogue, where people are chatting and talking. He abolished it. And he did so because he said it's a Chilul Hashem. If a Muslim was to come into our synagogue and see this, all these goings on in his time, it would be a Chilul Hashem. So let's cut it out. Rad Baz, 300 years later, says, I'm restoring Chazarat HaShatz. Why? Because the Muslims have such a low opinion of us, it doesn't matter what we do, everything we do will be horrible and bad. So you can't convince them. So don't even try to explain things to them. Their Jewish hatred, the hatred of Jews is so deeply entrenched. That's an example, I said, in the liturgical context. So that Harvey may be something of an answer, but he personally would never. The only time we know from him about his life is because he writes a letter to Samuel ibn Tibbon, who, as I told you, wanted to come and meet Maimonides and get some answers from him as to what he means. And our passage last week, chapter 8, okay, is a great example. Did the Rambam mean that God does give special hashgacha actively to the perfect, or does he mean the perfect, because they are perfect, can deal with even the most terrible of situations? But Maimonides says, don't come and see me. And he never answered the question. But why does he say don't come? He then explains what happened. That, he has such a difficult life, and ever since his brother died, and he has to support his brother's family and his own family, and he can't see him because he's so busy with his medical duties. And then he tells us about the fact that he was depressed for a year. You may remember the passage. He had to take to his bed at the death of his brother. But other than that, he says, like, he's famished. He comes home from Fostat, from the wazir's home. He's so weak, he has to take a little bit of nourishment, and lying on his bed, he examines, he gives drugs. Of course, he was a believer in preventive medicine rather than in aggressive treatment. And then on Shabbat is the only time he has to teach. People come to his home and they learn. Some want to learn Rif, some want to learn Gemara, some want to learn philosophy. So those are the only examples we have of the Rambam having actually talked about his own life, and he wouldn't do it when he's writing his books. They are all presented, as absolutely works at a distance, as if nothing was happened. He was simply having a great time writing and teaching. But of course, it didn't happen. It didn't happen like that. So an example for us possibly is to think about the life of the Rambam, to be aware that we have to continue as we are, to know that Netzach Yisrael lo yishaker. At the end of the day, we as a people will survive no matter what happens around us. And I think that the best way of dealing with this would be to say a perek of Tehillim that is so prescient. Are you ready, Yael? It's a short one. but I'm going to say and explain a parak of Tehillim. I wish I could find it. And okay, we will say this now. Tehillim Pei Gimel. Okay, Shmuley. All right. And I think Shir Mizmor La'asaf Tehillim Pei Gimel. This is Mizmor La'asaf, singers, Levitical singers in the temple. Elohim al domilach. God, do not be silent. Al techerash. Do not hold your peace. Va'al tishkot el. And do not remain unconnected. Ki hinei oyevecha yehemayun. Your enemies are stirred up, filled with strong emotion. Umesanecha nasu rosh. And those who hate you have arrogantly raised their heads. Al amcha yarimu sod. They have hatched cunning plans in secret against your people. Vayityatsu al sefunecha. And they took counsel against those who you protect. Yitzbeneni besuko b'yom ra. He said in LeDavid Hashem, God is meant to protect us on the evil day. Amru lechu v'nachidei migoy. They said, let us destroy the Jewish people. There will no longer be a nation. V'lo yizacher Shem Yisrael od. Nobody will remember the name Israel. It will be wiped off a map. Ki noatsu lev yachdav etza, counsel. They have made counsel together. Alecha berit yichrotu. But their pact is against God. No, we are his people. Therefore, whatever they do is against God. Ahole Edom, the tents of the Edomites who live in the desert, a little bit southeast. The Ishmaelim and the Ishmaelites, we know who they are. Moav v'Hagrim. Hagrim is the descendants of Hagar, who are not the descendants of Ishmael. And Moav is on the other side of the Jordan. Geval. What's Geval? Amazing. Geval is actually the border with Gaza. It's the southeastern border of Eretz Israel. Va'amon va'amalek. Amalek lives in the Negev. Pleshet im yoshvei tzor. Philistia, Palestine. The Philistines. Who gave the name Palestine to this part of the world?
Romans.
Who?
Romans.
The Romans. Hadrian plowed the Temple Mount and said, I'm going to remove any record of this being Jewish. It's not Judea. It's called Aelia Capitolina. It's going to be a pagan temple, and we're going to call the country Philistia, after these Philistines who actually came from Crete, and certainly not natives to this part of the world. And Tsor, where is Tsor?
Lebanon.
Lebanon. So we have Gaza, the border of Gaza, Otef Gaza, and Lebanon, with the Ishmaelim and the Hagrim. This is a psalm of David, or whenever, goes back a long time. I could say in French, plus ça change. Gam Ashur nilva imam. Now, who is Ashur? Ashur is Mesopotamia. Now, this would be in the period of David HaMelech before Assyria became a powerful empire, but it is strong enough, nilva imam, to supply arms and support. And of course, this is Iraq and Iran, Ashur, the land of the two rivers. Hayu Zaroa livnei Lot Sela. And the children of Lot, who are the Bedouins, they receive the support from Iran. Aseh lahem ki Midyan, ki Sisra, ki Yavin b'nachal Eshkon. God, do to them what you did to Sisra, Nachal Kishon, and Yavin melech Canaan. Nishmedu be'ein dor hayu domen la'adama. you destroyed them in a place called Endor, and they became rotten corpses strewn over the land. Shitemo nidivemo ka'orev v'chizaev. Make their princes, okay, nidivemo, it's biblical Hebrew, lashit is to put, okay, yashit. Yado, like Orev and Ze'ev were two Moabite kings, Uchezevach, Uchetzalmonah, Kol Nesichav. Zevach and Salmonah were Amalek princes who were killed by Gideon. Asher Amru, Nirisha Lanu, who said, we will inherit the land belongs to us. Et Naot Elohim, the holy places of God, they've been taken over by us. They belong to us. It's not Judea and Jerusalem. It is Palestine and El-Aqsa. Elohei shitemo kegalgal kekash lifnei ruach. God, make them like tumbleweed and chaff before the wind. The tumbleweed is a desert plant that the wind blows it. It's like a circle, and it rolls, and it spreads its seed that way. This is the galgal, the tumbleweed. Ke'esh tiv'ar ya'ar uchelehava talahet harim. They should be burned up like the fire burns a forest and the volcano explodes. Ken tirdefem besa'arecha uvesufatcha tavahalem. Make them panic with your storm and pursue them with your hurricane. Malei Penehem Kalon. But this is the point. Not because they need to be destroyed, because of what they're doing to us. Because the good and the right are on the side of Israel. And unless that message is understood by the nations of the world, they will always be doomed to perfidy. Malei Penehem Kalon. Make them ashamed of what they have done. Make these nations ashamed of their actions or their support for those actions. V'yivakshu shimcha Adonai. Make them seek the truth and the good. Yevoshu v'yibalu ade'ad v'yachbaru v'yovedu. And those who refuse to admit the truth will be destroyed. V'yedu ki ata shimcha Adonai levadecha elyon al kol ha'aretz. Our purpose is to bring the right and the good, and we always have to the rest of humankind. The fact that they don't listen, the fact that they close their ears, the fact that they want to be chomer and not surah is a great tragedy. But we will continue to survive. We will continue to try and teach the world to differentiate between truth and falsehood, between evil and good, because that is our mission. And that's why we are a Mamlechet Kohanim, the Goy Kadosh. Let's hope that we will have Yeshua and Nechama, and that they will be the right result. And we just pray and hope and support, and we pull together, because, as the Slonim Rebbe said, V'hish amda lavotenu velanu, shelo echad bilvad amad aleinu lachalotenu. We usually translate that to say that not one nation has risen against us to destroy us, but many, 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 countless. Slonim Rebbe said, it is shelo echad, the state of not being one, is amad aleinu lachalotenu. Our klaya, if chas v'shalom we can even think about it, will only happen if we are lo echad. If we are echad, nothing can overcome us. There's no fear of klaya. So the lo amad lechalotenu, it is the lo echad. We are echad, and I think that we are feeling that, and may we continue to feel that as strongly as we are feeling it now, because that is our guarantee that we have God on our side. Yael, I'm going to stop now. I hope that did something in the direction of what you wanted.
Amen.
So I think it's time to say Erev Tov, good evening, bonsoir, good Abend, good Nacht, and I hope that we will meet in better and quieter times next Wednesday for more reading of this 12th century book that you all agreed that you wanted to read. So we are reading it, okay? So you only have yourselves to blame if you might feel a little uncomfortable, but Rambam is quite an amazing thinker and a Jewish scholar and a passionate devotee to his people and to their future and to the way in which they can convey the message of truth and justice and goodness to the rest of the world. Netzach Yisrael lo yishaker, Hashem oz lamo yiten, Hashem yevarech et amo b'shalom. Good night. That's it.